This week on the show, we look at the role Equity Group is playing in spurring high-impact entrepreneurship across Africa. This is at the launch of a new book on Equity's role as a game changer in Africa. Our panel session:
Gitahi Gashahi, CEO and regional leader for Ernst & Young Eastern Africa, which include Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Southern Sudan. He was the chief guest and keynote speaker. Dr. Dana T. Redford, founder and president of the Policy Experimentation and Evaluation Platform, PEEP, an NGO for development and an internationally recognized expert on entrepreneurship and public policy. Dr. James Mwangi, Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Equity Group. Phyllis Wakiaga, Chief Executive of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, CAM, one of Kenya's leading business associations with over 800 members. Vimal Shah, Chairman and co-founder of Bidco Africa, and Dr. George N. Njenga, Founding Dean of Strathmore Business School and the Director of the Center for Sustainability Leadership at Strathmore University.
This session comes to you during the launch of the book, Developing Africa's Financial Services, edited by Dana Redford and supported by the World Bank. The book features a chapter on Equity Group and how it's spurring high-impact entrepreneurship across 6 African countries. Let's go straight to that session. I am a passionate Pan-Africanist, and I believe in the rise of the African continent. But I don't believe that Africa will rise by chance. I believe that Africa will only rise by design. We have a lot of passion in Africa. We also have a lot of intelligent people in Africa. We're an incredible continent. What's the problem? There's a Yoruba proverb that goes, no matter how hot your anger is, it cannot cook yams. Right? We want to move forward. We have passion, we have love, we have intelligence, but you know, that passion will not push us forward if we don't do the right things. And the equity journey, the equity story, and the other stories captured in this book give us perhaps what I would call a roadmap.
That everything has 2 points of creation. One is the creation here and here, and the next is the creation in reality. So what I want to say to you is that Equity Bank came from its entrepreneurs, but it had to start here to be now what it is today. And I want you to reflect on this for your work, for your country, and for the future of Africa. And then the question of rising Africa. Yes, this is part of the ongoing change and story. You know, from these are Economist covers where you have in 2000 the hopeless continent, you know, to 2011 Africa rising and aspiring Africa. So we see this transformation. And so this book is also a part of this story. It's trying to chronicle this from this area of financial services. The other aspect is you have an unbanked market here, which is quite interesting. And you have a market that is growing and developing. We see this, but it has to be something that we all actively work on. So we must look at the growing consumer class and what are the needs in which they have and how can we serve them best as entrepreneurs. So if we look at this, if you add banking to the mix, then you have part of the catalytic equation that you need. So this was the sort of ideas in which I drew from that made me realize that this could be a very interesting research project and something where there was a knowledge gap at which we could actually help. It requires us to reframe the problem. This is what entrepreneurs are best at. They come up and they reframe a problem and they're able to understand it differently. So what happened with the equity story? Equity, unlike the bank down the street, who was looking at the bank down the street as its competition, reframed the question. Who is the competition for Equity Bank? The competition was the mattress. The mattress was part of the competition. That is to say that people were saving under their mattress. And so who is your competition? Well, it's a different concept. It requires reframing the question. In your life, I hate to tell it to you if you don't know it already, but you are going to fail. That's not the question. The question is, what are you going to do when you do fail, and how are you going to get up from that failure and take the next step? And that's what entrepreneurs do great, and that's what entrepreneurial success stories can teach us, is how to do that. And that's one of the aspects of Equity's story.
Dana talked about reframing the problem. The mattress was the competitor, not this bank next door. And I think that is so critical if we just tap into that for a moment. And I have an African quote for that one too. Because we focused on the snake, we missed the scorpion. This one is Egyptian. So how do we ensure that we are constantly focusing on the right things and doing the right things to get where we need to be? And we were told it's 2 steps, right? It's the mental process, the vision, and then it's the reality. And what this chapter in this book does is it takes us through the equity journey in 3 parts. Equity 1.0 between 9 2004. What did they do? How did they do it? What did they focus on? And then from 2004 to 2014, Equity 2.0 takes us through the second phase of the journey. And then the phase we're in right now, Equity 3.0, what are they doing?
The first lesson is I've come to understand is high impact companies grow very fast because scale matters. And this is a lesson to every entrepreneur. It's good to have a business, but if you can make it grow and grow very fast, it is very impactful. Equity grew at a multiple of about 5 than the average company in Kenya. Over the last 25 years, Equity has been growing 10 times every 5 years. That is why it was number 66 out of 66, and now it is number 1 in East and Central factor in every respect. What did it do? In the process of growing very fast, it has helped 12.1 million customers. If you take 12.1, you see that is 56% of the adult population of Kenya. You're talking of one single bank in a country with 43 banks. So you can see the impact of growing very fast. We didn't grow as fast as the others that were registered in 2006, but it's because we needed to run maybe more lessons than we ran. Anybody could learn in that short period. But more importantly is to the shareholders. The shareholders, because of that growth, this has been maybe Africa's most rewarding entrepreneurial journey. For every share that one had in 2000, they have 600 shares out of bonuses and splits. AFC, maybe this is a way of giving back by writing a book, in 2002 invested $1.6 million. 5 years later, as you heard Americans invest with a strategy of exit, they exited, but for every dollar, they got $80. Where else other than in Africa does that type of money be made? But it's not made because it is in Africa. It was made because we grew very, very fast. The second one was what made headlines in New York and London when Helios invested in Equity 11 billion shillings on 28th of December 2007. And elections, I think, were on the following day. And on the 4th day, The country was in a political crisis, almost turning into civil war. And the headline of the Financial Times was a hideous investment down in flames in Kenya. That was the headline of the Financial Times and the New York. 7 years later, if I'm not mistaken, and this was a period that they invested the beginning of the end of the year, the beginning of the year, the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2000 persisted and terrorized the financial sector for 7 years. But in 7 years, Helios exited with 52 billion shillings. That is the power of rapid growth for an entrepreneur. So as an entrepreneur, if you really want to enjoy the sweat of your entrepreneurial skills, growing fast is important.
So why are we here? We're asking, with these stories, and in particular with the equity story, how do we ignite positive transformation for entrepreneurs in Kenya and across Africa? How do we grow our indigenous businesses? Wealth that will be kept here. Ultimately, what is this going to do? It's going to ensure we have wealth creation, we're going to have job creation, and much more. The multiplier effect is huge. Also, we were told, work smart. So how do we do that? Richard Branson said, I choose a lazy person to do a hard job, right? Because a lazy person will always find an easy way to do it. So how do we find out what are the right things, what are the critical interventions to ensure our business people are able to survive and to thrive?
The story of Dr. Mwangi and Equity Bank is the story of entrepreneurship. All entrepreneurs that we have interviewed are graduates from the University of Hard Knocks. They are men and women who constantly remind us through their deeds and actions that success does not come before work. The culture of sacrifice, perseverance, and persistence is second nature to them. They agree with Aristotle that excellence is not an art, it is a habit. There are people who have succeeded against odds and have learned to do the ordinary things extraordinarily well. They remind us that passion is more important than IQ. Great entrepreneurs are confronting the challenges facing our society with missionary zeal and an explorer attitude. Inspired by the words of John F. Kennedy, and I quote, "Let us not talk as what the country can do for us, but rather what we can do for our country." In a world where the only good news is bad news, we have learned to see the grass as half empty. To such a great extent that one of the biggest threats today is not political uncertainty or corruption. The biggest risk, if you ask me, might turn out to be pessimism and negativity. The youth, our future and hope, are increasingly becoming disillusioned and hopeless. They are looking for role models to inspire them. People who can show them a different path than on the beaten track. Lateral thinkers as opposed to linear thinkers. Yet, they are at their disposal ladders of opportunity that were unavailable for previous generations. Reminds me of the words of Reverend Jesse Jackson in his keynote speech during the Democratic Party Convention in July 14, 1992, and I quote, "Above all, we must reach out and touch our children. Our children are embittered and hurt, but it is not a congenital disease. They were not born that way. They live amid violence and rejection, in broken streets, broken grass, broken sidewalks, broken families, and broken hearts. Their music, their lap, their video, their art reflects their broken world. Too many of our children see jail as a relief station and death as a lad beyond pain. During this knowledge age, our young people can compete on an equal footing. We must tell the inspiring entrepreneurial stories happening in our midst to give hope and confidence to our people.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Very inspirational speeches there at the launch of the book, Developing Africa's Financial Services. Next week, we take a look at an incredible panel session at the same event and the question and answer session that follows. Sometimes in some ways the entitlement, the serikali's idea, thinking that I cannot do for myself. We have a myriad of problems that are mindset issues. We have some structural issues we need to deal with, infrastructural issues. But when you look at this equity journey and the story, what for you do you think are the most important things that can create the transformation that we need to see within our economies?
I think it's an amazing case study for every one of us to say, what a Kenyan company can do, having a can-do attitude. I think that's something that entrepreneurs normally have, is a can-do attitude to see things differently. They're not, academia, they're not going to be looking at a curriculum and say, this is the curriculum, this is the way to do things. They're going to be finding newer ways. And I think this is where the difference is in entrepreneurship. I see this whole spirit in Kenyans a lot. I think a lot of Kenyans will find a way out and say, fine, it's not about government, it's not about this, let's find a way out. I'm not talking about unethical ways, I'm talking about ethical ways of doing things. And I think that's the difference between entrepreneurs and those who are compliant. A lot of our students are taught to be compliant, to be this way and to be that way, and they're run-of-the-mill, there's standardized products. You know, we have universities churning out standardized products. I think this is where the entrepreneurship spirit comes out to say, I can do things differently. Be willing to say that it's not about prestige. And I think in Kenya we have this other issue that getting a government job is the arrival. You've arrived everywhere and that's it. That's the most important thing. Entrepreneurs are not looked upon well by society in Kenya because they look like, oh, that's not a prestigious job. That's not where it's got that whole accolade of being a mheshimiwa. And I think this is where the difference is. And I think that's something that's crucial. However, on the contrary, I think a lot of possibilities exist already because we have an enabling environment in this country right now. Entrepreneurs can do a lot of things themselves. I think equity is a simple example of saying, energizing, empowering 100,000, that's what I hear, 100,000 entrepreneurs with financial access to say, go out and do your thing. That's something that's important. However, we should stop complaining and saying it's about serikali, it's about government. Government is doing its job, private sector needs to do its job, and entrepreneurs need to start saying, let me start doing it. What we see lack of in Kenya or in African countries is startup funding. A lot of times, I know my own story because when we went out starting up and going to banks, they would say, no, we need to have you prove yourself first, and then start doing a lot of things. I think this is where startup funding or what we call venture capital or angel investing needs to come in a big way here, where people with an idea, with the startup process need to start looking at things. A lot of Kenyans want to own 100% of their company and say, I need to own it 100%. I think the real example is to say, I could own 10% of an elephant, and that could become bigger. This is probably something we need to unlock in terms of
The book talks about minded so that you're going on a journey together. Let me come to you, Dr. George Jega, the Dean of Strathmore Business School. And Vimal has spoken about academia, and we know there's a huge gap between the skills that are needed on the market right now and people who come out of university. There's a question of how to make what you do at universities more relevant to the reality on the ground, especially when it comes to an area like entrepreneurship, but also the question of data, information. What are your thoughts on what we must do and what we can learn from this story to transform the situation?
So you mentioned two, and thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'm very proud to be part of the academia. You've mentioned two issues, data and the university. They don't necessarily go together. Number one, this country does not need universities, it needs technical schools. It needs people to get quickly into the skilled labor workforce. So I have always thought that my structure as one of the founders of Strathmore, one of the people who have supported Strathmore to grow, that we tell our lecturers the best thing for them to earn more money is to publish in journals that are very high impact journals. We are talking about journals that are read by the Europeans and the Americans and the Indians now and the Chinese. And I always keep asking my professors, do you really want me to measure you according to that or according to the impact you're doing for your society? And so right now I'm supporting 4 companies. So I stop teaching and I get out onto the street. And I say, it's better that I spend myself on the street than to write great books, which I know Bwana Gitahi, the story wins in the end. But let me tell you something, there is a time for the story. The time for the story is and the 4th has demonstrated, all right, no skilled workforce. But data, yes. Data, I am now setting up a data center for business and for entrepreneurs so that they can know what the market looks like and where they need to invest and things like that. Data, yes, in the universities. But if you look at the structure of how public and private sector work with the university is an addendum that would rather not be. No policy in this country looks at the university. I went to James in 2006, I remember. And he was going to be given a scholarship by Harvard. And I told him, David, if you don't support us in our programs for entrepreneurship, who do you think will support us, the Americans or the British? No. Unless industry realizes data will come from the university, real data, quality data, then for once, stop charging fees that will eliminate people from our university and let industry come and fund research.
Fund the research. Thank you so much. Put the money where it needs to be. Let me come to you, Phyllis, right now, and your thoughts on this. It's an incredible journey, and you've got many people that you work with under the Kenya Association of Manufacturers who've undergone similar journeys. But this one it's epic in the hope that it gives, in the direction it gives people because of the failures and then the success that has followed. So for you, what really comes to mind as the highlights of this journey and what business people can take from it?
I think for me, one of the most powerful things actually comes from the Bible. In Zechariah 4 verse 10, it says, do not despise the beginning of small things. And I think for every entrepreneur I've talked with at CAM, all of them, starting from Vimal, who was our chairman, they all started small. And listening to Dr. James Mwangi speaking today, entrepreneurship is really a journey that starts in the mind and that is translated into reality. So really having the vision and driving it and seeing it through. So for me, that's what has really stood out in the conversation today. And how does this translate into reality? Today we have the high unemployment that we talk about, but we have mindsets that still believe that employment is the only way to go. So how do we begin to transform those mindsets? And the reality is we must catch them. Teaching entrepreneurship in schools, instilling that mindset in people so that we can look at starting businesses and growing businesses. And I know it's true that businesses normally start and learn along the way, but I like what Dr. James Mwangi said, that sitting in retrospect and looking at it, There are serious lessons that are sitting in this book. So why do we allow businesses to continue making mistakes? Can we create products that allow business people or entrepreneurs to start right, so that they start their businesses not necessarily in a red ocean or opportunistic businesses that will not grow, but businesses that sit closest to their DNA? As a country, for example, agriculture is closest to our DNA. Why don't we really invest in growing entrepreneurs in that area? And then once entrepreneurs start, the other challenge is growth, because a lot of us start, but we never scale up. So looking at business growth, how do we solve that? Unemployment has been discussed as the biggest challenge, and I think even His Excellency is having jobs at the center of his agenda. But we must realize unemployment is a systemic problem that requires a systemic solution. And how do we do that and come up with solutions that are going to solve this issue? What we've looked at today about high impact investment and entrepreneurship, looking at businesses that actually meet a need in society. Where there's a pain, there's definitely a gain, and entrepreneurs come in to fill in that gap. So we can instill this mindset as we go forward in our students and in business schools, and have entrepreneurship not taught as a subject, but incorporated into daily life, because anyone can be an entrepreneur. A doctor can, a lawyer can, a teacher can, and they can do it in their field of expertise where they have passion and interest. So I think we really need to change the mindset.
And now we end the show, as always, with words of African wisdom. Our African proverb this week goes, if there were no elephant in the jungle, the buffalo would be a great animal. How do we continue to grow our businesses and our impact across Africa? Clearly, entrepreneurship plays a key role. Next week, more. Join us then. Blessings to you, and blessings to Africa.